Thank you. And first of all, let me just say thank you, Chair, and the ranking member for holding this hearing. Really appreciate that. So let me start with Equifax and some of the concerns I have. I'm from Nevada. There's about 3 million people there, and of the 3 million people, 1.3 million were impacted by this breach. In fact, received over 4 dozen letters. Let me just give you an example of one of them. I have a woman in Carlin who wrote, "No citizen has a say in the reporting practices of businesses to credit bureaus. I did not choose Equifax to store my information, nor did my husband, nor any of our children, yet it is there, and clearly Equifax did not do enough to protect our information." So a couple of questions to start with, and I want to drill down into the data that is collected, because I think part of this is the data collection, and we should be looking at that. Equifax, my understanding of the breach of the 145 million consumers, the data that was collected was names of those consumers, social security numbers, addresses, birth dates, driver's license numbers, and credit card information. Is that true? Yes or no?
And in some cases, yes, some cases, no.
What other data do you collect on consumers besides the data that I just identified?
We have the piece of the that was affected only included, most of the data included social security numbers, name, date of birth, and address. That's it.
What other data do you collect other than what I just identified?
We have
So I'm going to ask for the record, we'll submit that. If Equifax could provide me with that question,
Absolutely.
that would be very helpful. Because I'm curious, does Yahoo collect driver's license numbers?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so I think that's helpful in this discussion, because to me, the data breach that happened at Equifax is egregious. It happens all the time. We're all getting pinged. Government's getting pinged. Companies are getting pinged. We've heard it, I think, from what I've heard from Ms. Mayer, cybersecurity is a global challenge. We're always all getting pinged. It is incumbent upon all of us, including the private sector, to not only have the top-line security, sophisticated security, always evolving with it, always ensuring that you're protecting that data. And when you fail to do that, then yes, you should be held accountable, and the enforcement should be swift, and consumers should be notified, and there should be restitution for those consumers. But we haven't had the discussion on the data. To me, that's what this is about, because quite frankly, even those individuals that you work with now and those consumers that had credit locks and credit freezes, their data was still breached, correct?
Could be, yes. If they
Right, so it doesn't matter, because that's what they're going to go after, is that social security number. And I see, Mr. Wilkinson, you're nodding yes. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Senator.
So shouldn't consumers be the ones to say, I want to opt in or opt out when it comes to the data that I am sharing with you? Don't you agree?
Well, this is part of the way the economy works. I mean, when the consumer goes and
The consumer doesn't have a choice, sir. The consumer does not have a choice in the data that you're collecting. That's what I hear from my consumers. That's what I hear all the time. I know it. And quite frankly, the credit reports that I get as a consumer do not tell me all the data that you're collecting on me. Isn't that true?
the credit report collects the trade lines that we have on there for your.
That's true, isn't it? And let me just say, I was Attorney General for 8 years in the state of Nevada. Identity theft in the state of Nevada and across this country is through the roof. And every day we dealt with somebody whose identity was stolen. And what is so egregious about what you have done is now for the rest of their lives, the woman in Carlin and all of the people that I hear from Nevada, of the 1.3 million people whose identities were stolen, they are going to have to clear their record for the rest of their lives. And what does that mean? That means that somebody's going to buy a boat in their name, a house in their name. People are going to commit crimes in their name. And believe me, as a prosecutor, I've seen it. So they're spending the rest of their lives clearing their record and their good name. And that's why this is so egregious. And I think you have an obligation not only to look at the data that you're collecting, but make sure you're protecting it. And if there is a breach, you're doing everything you can to remediate and bring restitution to those individuals whose information is stolen. So let me talk to you, because I've got a short period of time. Mr. Wilkinson, you talked about the data and Social Security numbers and the idea that now we have to look at a different way of identifying the PEII. I'm very curious if you have anything specific on what we should be doing when we're looking at that data and PII that is shared and collected.
Well, the first thing to note has been noted a few times, which is in the case of these breaches, in the case of this most recent breach, 145 million items of personal information was leaked. When you combine this with other breaches that have occurred, and there's a list of breaches that we could cite, we're getting very close to all of the personal information in the United States has already been breached in some way. So, of course, the question applies, which is, what are we trying to protect at this point? In the case of some of the financial card breaches, like the Target breach from several years ago or 3 years ago that we actually testified, my company testified on behalf of the requester peer at that time, I think there's a good point to compare and contrast between what's happened with some of those breaches and in this case, and that is the financial payment system is reasonably resilient. In that case, despite the fact that it was a burden for consumers, the ability for consumers to have a new card reissued, have that fraud remediated, and be back in business, the ability to do commerce is relatively well known and relatively resilient. In addition, the liability largely fell to the financial institutions, the issuers of those financial cards, credit cards, debit cards. So I think looking to some examples like what we see in financial payments ecosystem is an example of a more resilient system than what we have in this form of identity today. But our identities are out there, so I continue to reinforce that our position is that we believe that a more resilient identity framework needs to be brought forward. There's several examples. I cited one.
And I'm running out of time, and I know my time is up, but let me just say this. I agree with you. Our identities are out there. Some of us it's too late.
Yep.
But to our kids, it's not too late.
Right.
And we've got to look to the future and protecting their information as well. So it is something that, to me, it's not static. We've got to continue to figure out how we address this issue if we're going to talk about digital identities or the government coming up with something different. But I do agree with you that there should be that public-private partnership. We've got to figure this out for the benefit of those people that we're taking their data, and they have no choice. They have no choice that companies are taking their personal information, they're monetizing it, and then they get stuck for the rest of their lives dealing with the results of a breach. So thank you.